Welcome to Buckeye Turf Podcast. My name is Carl Danneberger, Professor of Turfgrass Science at The Ohio State University. The topic of this podcast is shade. It is estimated that 25% of turf is grown in shade. Low light conditions caused primarily by tree shading, but also by building or stadium shade, impacts negatively turfgrass growth and development. Shade causes changes in physiological and morphological characteristics of the turf that often result in reduced turf density and health of the turf that can result in rapid decline. Competition for resources like nutrients and water can also occur between the trees and the turf. In this picture, the portion of the fairway that appears brown is due to the competition for water between the tree roots and turf. In this case, the turf, which is zoysia grass, is losing. Now this is the same golf hole shown previously, but a significant number of the trees have been removed. Competition for resources, in this case water, has been eliminated, in addition to the hole becoming more visually appealing. Trees also influence the microclimate around the turf. This tee is not only shaded, but the undergrowth has caused an obstruction to airflow that results in an environment of low light, high humidity, and little air movement. Now that same tee is still shaded, but some of the trees have been removed or pruned and the underbrush removed, causing a change in the microenvironment in which the turf is growing. Both photographs were taken in August, several years apart. We will now discuss in greater detail the impact of light quantity and quality on turfgrass growth and the impact of microenvironment effects from shading objects on the changes in the microenvironment. The amount of light or radiant energy that the turf receives when shaded is considerably less than what it would have received in full sun. This graph shows that impact. The yellow shaded area represents the amount of radiation that the turf receives in full sun. The x-axis represents the visible light wavelengths 380 to 700 nanometers, and the y-axis the amount of radiant energy. The amount of radiant energy the turf receives under a deciduous tree, the green area, or a conifer tree, blue area, or building shade, which is the purple area, is greatly reduced, almost by 90%. It is obvious the reduction in the amount of light will influence the photosynthetic ability of the turf. It also begs the question of how much light does a turf need to survive. It has been reported that turf grasses, both cool and warm, need a minimum of 4 to 5 hours of sunlight. However, this amount often does not provide enough radiant energy for what we would consider acceptable turf quality. Creeping bentgrass can be shaded for 6 hours with little wear or traffic and provide acceptable turf quality. However, if you provide stress to that turf, the decline can be rather rapid. Warm season turf grasses require more sunlight. Tiff eagle and ultra-dwarf Bermuda grass requires at least 8 hours of sunlight to provide acceptable turf quality. Not only the amount of light is important to turfgrass growth, but also the quality of that radiant energy that the plant does receive. One of the impacts of shade is that the quality of light changes. Along the visible light spectrum, the blues and reds are most photosynthetically active. Under canopy shade, the amount of blue and red light is greatly reduced, while far red light increases in proportion to red, which is represented by the far red bar on the right. In general, light that is absorbed by the turf is high in red. That light that is reflected or transmitted tends to be high in far red compared to red. The relationship between red and far red light impacts turfgrass growth. In full sun, where proportionally red is greater than far red, we get a procumbent growth habit along with increased tillering. In shade, where far red is proportionally greater than red, we see a change in growth habit. The plants are more stemmy, upright, and the leaf blades are thinner with less tillering. From a management perspective, the impact of light quality plays an important role. For example, when we lower the mowing height, still within its adaptive height of cut for that species, and let's say this is Kentucky bluegrass fairway, so by lowering the height, we want the ball to sit up. How do the plants know to get smaller and denser? Part of the reason is the lower you mow, you expose more of the plant to red light. At higher heights, more shading is occurring that discourages tillering and shorter growth. The impact of both the quantity and quality of light can be seen in a study done by Ben Worley and David Gardner at The Ohio State University, where they established and maintained tall fescue under various light levels. Here is one of the treatments in full sun. Notice in the left-hand corner the radiant energy level. Keep the 49 moles per meter squared per day and the far red ratio of 1.4 in mind as we move through the next few slides. In this treatment, the tall fescue is established and maintained under neutral light. The quantity of light has dropped to only 8% of the full sun treatment. However, the quality of light of the red to far red ratio remains above 1, quite similar to the full sun. The deciduous shade treatments are shown here. Again, the quantity of light is only 7% of full sun, but now the far red ratio is below 1, reflecting proportionally more far red light. This graph is similar to slide 9, the one showing the effect of different shade treatments on the radiant energy that gets to the turf. Graphically, it shows the quantity and quality of light hitting the tall fescue treatments that were shown in the previous 3 slides. This photograph shows the effects of the different shade treatments on tall fescue, and in general what happens to turf grass in shade. In the middle, the full sun plants appear procumbent or short, good tillering, and good leaf thickness. The plants to the right, growing in deciduous shade, show the impact of low light, succulent narrow leaves, elongated growth, and less tillering. Notice too the impact on root growth. The shaded plants have significantly less root mass than those plants in full sun. The plants to the left were grown in neutral shade and are in general intermediate in development between the full sun and deciduous shade treatments, reflecting the impact of light quality, red to far red ratio, on plant development. I have placed a yellow line that crosses these plants to reflect a hypothetical mowing height. One of the problems with turf growing in shade, for example, on a putting green. Mowing at a given height on greens in full sun will actually proportionally remove more tissue per plant in shade than in full sun, most likely causing a type of chronic scalping that may contribute to decline. Under shaded conditions, it is important to recognize the change in growth habit and as such make mowing adjustments, like slightly raising the height of cut, trying to reduce wear and turning because the plants are thinner and will not recover as quick due to less tillering. Also too, related to this, switching to grooved rollers or walk behind mowers may help reduce wear and injury. The impact of only slight adjustments in management practices can be seen here. If we raise the height of cut, for example, from 0.125 to 0.141, a 16th thousandth of an inch increase, we increase the leaf area and photosynthetic potential 13%. If we increase the mowing height from 0.125 to 0.156, a 31 thousandths of an inch increase, the turf leaves and photosynthetic potential increases by 25%. In addition to the changes in plant growth and development shown previously, low light conditions change the internal leaf morphology. The pictures shown here are leaf cross sections. The leaf section to the left, or the full sun, shows a leaf with good cell structure. The cells are compacted, cell walls are relatively thick, and the leaf itself is thicker. The shaded leaf on the right shows a thin, poor cell organization with many spaces between the cells. These spaces are often filled with water, increasing its succulence. These thin leaf blades may make them susceptible to wear and also to disease. For example, An aspect of shade tolerance for certain Kentucky bluegrass cultivars is resistance to diseases. This photograph shows various Kentucky bluegrass cultivars growing under shade. The cultivar that is doing well also happens to be resistant to the disease powdery mildew, which is a disease that attacks turf under low light conditions. It appears almost as if the leaf blades were painted white. Initially, it does not appear as a serious problem, but over time, the turf will thin significantly. The pathogen that causes powdery mildew penetrates the leaf surface, the cuticle and the epidermis cells via a penetration peg known as a haustorium. It may be surmised that the thinner, more delicate leaf blades are more prone to penetration. In a previous podcast on radiant energy, the compensation point was discussed. As a quick review, the compensation point is where photosynthesis equals respiration. For cool season turf grasses, the compensation point occurs at a much lower radiant energy level than for warm season turf grasses. Variation in compensation points can occur among turfgrass species. One example is the compensation points for annual bluegrass shown here and creeping bentgrass. Research at Michigan State University reported that annual bluegrass has a 12 to 25% lower compensation point compared to creeping bentgrass. This may be one of the reasons that annual bluegrass easily colonizes creeping bentgrass greens in shade. This photograph is a creeping bentgrass green that is partially shaded. Notice that in the shaded area, Poa annua, the light green spots, are appearing, while in the full sun area, Poa annua is absent. In some of our research, we have found that Poa annua can colonize a creeping bentgrass green in shade within 2 to 3 years under the right conditions. Besides the light quantity and quality, the microclimate created by shade structures like trees can greatly influence turf quality. In a study at Oklahoma State University, researchers investigated shaded greens and broke the components down to restricted air movement and shade. What they found was overall turf quality declined the greatest where air circulation was restricted, along with greater disease pressure associated with the restricted air movement. Root loss was the greatest with low light conditions, which you would expect. By restricting air movement, we see humidity levels increase near the canopy, along with a reduction in evapotranspiration rates. It means that if excessive water occurs on these greens, the drying process is much slower than greens in open areas. Here, soil moisture levels were high, with little air movement, and the turf stress from not enough light led to a rapid decline under warm summertime temperatures. Sometimes the excessive water in the root zone is called wet wilt. When managing turf in shade, do not overwater. Too much water can cause decline to turf in shade and increase the likelihood of other problems, in this case algae. Promote air movement by removing underbrush, trimming trees, or in some cases using fans. Regarding fertility, specifically nitrogen, be judicious in your applications. In a study conducted at Ohio State University, we found that nitrogen levels that performed well on USGA constructed creeping bentgrass greens in full sun did not fare very well when shade and air restrictions were imposed, as shown in the area in this study in the background. We found that on nitrogen amounts that provided the best quality in full sun were some of the worst treatments in shade. As a rule of thumb, greens in shade should receive 50% of that used in full sun. Similar results have been found in studies done on warm season turf grasses. Artificial lights have been used with marginal results at best. Lights are being used more extensively on sports fields in the United Kingdom and Europe with reported success, but the costs are significant. Managing turf in shade is not just one thing, but a total management program. Ideally, removing the problem would make managing the turf easier. However, if this is not possible, promote as much air movement as possible, water carefully, realizing turf and sun has different water requirements than turf and shade. Adjust mowing to account for changes in turf grass growth and shade. Raise the height slightly and try to reduce wear. Fertilize judiciously again. Turf thinning in shade is not corrected by applying excessive nitrogen to promote tillering. If air restrictions continue after tree removal or underbrush removal, fans may be recommended for athletic fields and greens. This concludes this podcast on shade.